of the Elevate Network. Today, in partnership with the World Localization Day initiative, working in conjunction with Local Futures. Today, we're here to address an important question. How can a localized movement bring about fundamental systemic change? My name is Astin-Gregory. I'm the host of the Elevate Network, a private community for activists, change makers, free thinkers, and visionaries from all across the world who are here to challenge the status quo, exchange ideas, and seek solutions to some of the complex issues facing humanity in our world. In celebration of World Localization Day, we have partnered, as I mentioned, with Local Futures, founded by one of our guests today, Helena Norberg-Hodge, to firstly co-stream the premiere of Planet Local, A Quiet Revolution, the film that we shared last night, a brand new inspirational film featuring Helena herself, Charles, who's with us today, Charles Eisenstein, Russell Brand, Vandana Shiva, Dr. Gabor Mate, George Ferguson, one of our panelists as well today. And now we're having a fascinating panel discussion with some truly insightful guests. Now, before I introduce our guests today, let me first briefly introduce World Localization Day. World Localization Day celebrates the localization movement, which seeks to recapture autonomy from global corporations and foster deep and profound change at a local level. For decades now, many of us have seen the effects of an increasingly globalized economy and increasingly centralized power systems. And the result of this can be felt across all of our communities. We're witnessing a global dependency upon international supply chains, the degradation of the natural world, the decline of democracy, and an increasingly polarized and divided society. So many of the decisions made by central organizations are so far removed from local communities that those decisions are now affecting people in a profound way on a local level. So for the third year in a row, people all across the world are coming together to explore the power of localization, a growing movement for change, moving away from corporate rule towards democracy within local empowered communities. So our panel today, as I mentioned, is here to address the question, how can mass localization bring about fundamental change? And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. We've got Helena Norberg-Hodge from Local Futures, who's the founder of Local Futures and the instigator of World Localization Day. We're joined by Charles Eisenstein, who's a counterculture philosopher, writer, and speaker. George Ferguson, who's the first elected mayor of Bristol in the UK, an architect, urbanist, and environmentalist, and John Freeman of Matter Whole Foods, who's here on the ground doing his part to localize the food supply. So it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest today. And I'd like to begin, Helena, by coming to you to give a bit more context on the work that you're doing around localization. And in particular, why do you think this year's event is so important, given everything that we've been through over the last 2 years with the pandemic?
Well, I wouldn't say this year is more important, but I would say that this year shows that the interest in localization has massively increased. With COVID now, with the war in Ukraine, more and more people, even at the level of the Financial Times and Wall Street Journal, they're beginning to question a little bit the vulnerability of global supply chains. So there is definitely a huge shift in awareness, but I think we urgently need to get this bigger picture out that links the tragedy of epidemics of depression, of financial, economic insecurity worldwide to the rapid destruction of the environment, the rapid destruction of life itself. It's all as a consequence of a techno-economic system that has become more and more powerful, particularly now through the use of algorithms and huge techno systems, something that we really need to discuss a lot. So we are in a situation now where vastly less than 1% are winners and much more than 99% are losers. So it's high time that we get the wake up and the sort of mass movement, a movement of movements where we come together and say, enough is enough. We've got to shift the direction of what we call progress, of what we call growth, to support genuine growth, the growth of ecosystems and healthy human societies, healthy individuals. And we feel we're offering a very clear picture that I hope people will delve into, and that it will help to bring together people who are until now working more on single issues, on human well-being versus ecological well-being versus restoring democracy, or just focus on climate. All of this narrow perspective can be linked to this demand for a systemic shift.
Indeed, and I'm curious to know what you think are the biggest opportunities in 2022. You know, where do you see the chances to grow the movement, and where people can get involved, particularly in some of the developed part of the world, the UK, US, other parts of Europe?
Well, I'm seeing that the crises, particularly now with COVID itself, but then also the various climate emergencies, have led to an experience of the vital importance of local community relationships. Absolutely essential. They become, it's raised awareness very, very rapidly. And I just think the opportunities are, I think, to use these technologies of mass communication as much as we can to help people to see more clearly how their voice and their action can support a systemic change in support of life, to enable the reconnection, the inner reconnection, as we are once again finding who we really are. It's to do with balancing the brain between left and right. At every level, it's about reconnection, and that understanding of the incredible benefits for personal health, for personal happiness, and the healing of the planet. That path of reconnection. I think people are sometimes not clear about what the ideas that are being fed to them, the narratives that are being fed to them around how do we deal with climate change, for instance, the focus on carbon. Now regenerative agriculture has been pushed out there as a way of dealing with food security, and many really well-intentioned people who are actively involved, as now George is with his food project and permaculture movements, transition movement. They're doing wonderful work to restore ecosystems and increase productivity. But by giving the label regenerative, they're giving an alibi to Unilever, Monsanto, and giant corporations who have been pushing that term to keep our perspective narrow, to not focus on the system, the trajectory from the seed to the table. And as George will say, I'm back again with the composting. So without that systemic view, we end up using a single label to do with the mode of production. And we end up, as I say, giving alibi to giant corporations and actually strengthening a trajectory that simultaneously reduces productivity and yields while increasing not only pollution, but the sale of products, processed food, high fructose corn syrup, trans fats, that are now very clearly leading to an epidemic of ill health, heart disease, diabetes, etc. So the language, the view, the perspective, we need that holistic view. And that's where the opportunity is. As we put out the big picture, that's where we can catalyze and bring people together who are in large numbers. The majority want change. They feel it. They know we need fundamental change. And they are so ready for a vision that can help them link hands with others, as opposed to what the dominant narrative is doing, which is using very effective algorithms to separate and polarize us. As we've seen in the social media, it is lucrative to encourage not only polarization, but nasty, really divisiveness and violence, verbal violence, but also linked to physical violence. That is lucrative. And if we don't wake up to the bigger picture that connects, we're going to be caught up in this prison of ideas that divide us.
Yes, thank you, Helena. I think there's some really interesting comments there around the need for a movement of movements. What's been fascinating for me to observe across the world is a lot of movements are fighting different surface level issues, but actually not communicating with each other and working together, even though they're working on the the same root issue, if you will, but that they end up falling out on the surface level when we're actually all working towards a similar aim. Charles, I'd like to come to you now. You've commented over the last couple of years on different cultural narratives. You've looked at these issues for many years now. You've also commented recently how the ongoing migration of life to this digital realm has been accelerated by the COVID pandemic. You've spoken on how the illusion that technology can meet our deeper needs for a happier life and how that presents an opportunity for a renaissance of local communities. I'm interested to hear your follow-on from Helena and comment on some of these pieces around both kind of narratives and the digitization of the world and polarization that follows.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of topics.
Yes, especially as you've got a short timeline.
So I think I'll just continue where Helena left off with the issue of polarization, which, on the one hand, we can look at the algorithms and the political interests and so forth, but I think that one reason why the public is so easily polarized is because of you could call it a crisis of identity and belonging. If you don't have strong ties to the people and animals and plants and place around you, then you really don't know who you are. You're not rooted, because knowing who you are depends on being known by others. We're not separate individuals. So when we live in an atomized society where people are dependent not on the people around them and familiar and intimate not with the people around them, but dependent on distant markets, distant people mediated by technology and money, then they don't know who they are. So along comes, it could be a corporate brand, it could be a political brand, it could be some ideology that tells them who they are by defining them in opposition to somebody else. So you could say that this polarization is more a symptom than a cause of our current social inability to be coherent and to solve any of our problems, which are actually quite easy to solve objectively. Helena mentioned that true regenerative agriculture beyond the label can bring, not only ecological healing, but even higher yields. I mean, we could completely solve the climate crisis, which I don't even like using that word. That's another one of those words that tends to get hijacked into globalized solutions. So I would rather say the ecological crisis. I mean, we could easily solve that if we were in agreement. And the changes we would have to make would actually be less than the changes that we made to in the face of COVID. Like, those were profound changes and huge sacrifices for many, many of the world's less affluent people in the global South, for example. That's one thing that doesn't show up in epidemiological metrics, the number of children that are, being starved, stunted, wasted all around the world. So anyway, another thing I'll pick up on that Helena said was, I can't remember the exact words you used, Helena, but it was about, you said saying enough. And this is to realize that we have a choice in the matter, and that what has been presented to us as technological progress is not an inevitability. That is fundamental, because the narrative, or even like the mythology of progress, says that whether it's good or bad, it is inevitable. Helena's work has spoken a lot to the fake inevitability of urbanization. And you look at all kinds of demographic projections, and they all take urbanization for granted. Well, why? Are we sovereign as a collective? like, or not. I mean, can't we choose whether to urbanize or not? Can't we choose whether to adopt more and more technology? But this assumption of inevitability and of this arc of progress that takes us more and more away from materiality, even more and more away from place, more and more away from community. That perception of inevitability and its association with progress, I think that's one reason why the public, and especially progressives, have been have so easily accepted the social changes in response to COVID, whether it's working from home, learning from home, dating from home, like everything in your little bubble, like that, or technological dependency for health, for immunity, like all of the things that came with COVID seemed to fit, or did fit, this narrative of inevitable progress. And it's really, you know, I think that COVID was an enormous, it was, I mean, I called it an initiation, a coronation into sovereignty, because it says to us, here's where we've been going. Here's a glimpse of the future. Do you want it? Is this really what you want? And if we awaken to our choice, then we might say no. And we might overthrow the narrative of inevitability. I mean, the inevitability, it actually does have a truth, which is that if we don't exercise our voice, if we don't exercise our sovereignty and true democracy and take the choice, then it is inevitable. I mean, this is the default that we're moving toward. So that's why films like this and events like this are really important, because they tell us that there is that there is an alternative, and they display what the alternative might be. Yeah, I mean, I could say an awful lot more about the metaverse, but I'll just simply, like, beyond all the intellectual arguments about the effect on society and the depression and the anxiety and the addiction, like all the stuff that has skyrocketed during COVID, I'll just point to how do you feel when you're online all day? Something in the human spirit recognizes that no amount of virtual experiences can substitute for the real thing. Ultimately, what we're doing here is reclaiming life. And life is in the world, and it is through relationship. It's not separate from the world. I mean, we are incarnate here to be here. Okay, I'll pause with that and hand it back over to you, Dem.
Thank you, Charles, for your comments. And I know that you've only got a short time with us here today, so you've left us with some thought-provoking material to pick up from. Thank you for your contributions. George, I'm going to come to you now. I've got some questions for you, George, but I'm also interested in your reflections on what both Helena and Charles have shared before we progress.
Well, as always, Helena and Charles have come up with some very wise words. And I'm quite optimistic about the whole localization movement, because I think it's something that everybody can relate to. You know, I'm very keen on campaigning about climate change and the environment and all those issues, but actually virtually everything comes back to local. And I think local sells. And so that I don't think we need to be too pessimistic about it. I mean, I hate the fact that we've got food moving across the world completely unnecessarily and sometimes there and back again. It's absolutely mad. But what we're finding in our little ecosystem in parts of Bristol is that people are magnetized by local, by things that happen locally, by food that is grown and eaten locally. They love the story. And I think our challenge is how we accelerate it so that people recognize that it's urgent that we deal with these things. You know, I totally agree with Helena that it's about mental health. It's, and I think Charles agrees about that. It's about our state of mind. And if we spend our lives on screens, we're not going to engage with people in a proper manner. And we have a wonderful project in Bristol that is trying to tackle, for instance, the epidemic that we have in young men's suicide levels. It's called Talk Club. It's about, and this, like World Localization, is going global. It started in Bristol. It's now got local groups all over the world where people come together to talk about themselves, their state of mind, how do you feel out of 10? And we've connected it with food, interestingly, with low alcohol or low alcohol drinks, and that raise money for the project. And you couldn't do that, except you couldn't do that in any other way other than through local connections. So while I believe that food is absolutely at the center of localization, because it's a need, we can see that food security is better answered by local growing and having a true circular food economy, that self-sufficiency has become so much more important together with food security since what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and in the UK with us coming out of the EU, people now realize that we need to be more self-sufficient. Maybe that is one good thing that's come out of something that I disagreed with, but nevertheless, I think the fact is that it's easier now to access local food than it is to access food coming from abroad. But all these things feed into a sense of community and engagement with the people around you. And so I am really optimistic that people are getting a sense of feel good around some of the things that have been forced on us as a result of COVID. I'm much more engaged with my street and the people around in the immediate local community than I ever was before. I'm more engaged with natural life around me and more engaged with what happens in the garden and the park next to me. I'm more engaged with the dog walkers, even though I don't have a dog, who engage with each other's naturally. And I'm not encouraging everybody to have a dog, but watch what dog walkers do to engage with each other and exchange ideas. Maybe we should all have an invisible dog and we'd meet everybody in the community and we would talk with them. I'm engaged with markets that are street markets, that we have a food market. And what's really fascinating about it, go to a supermarket and watch how much people engage with each other. Very little. Go to a food open market, a street market, car park market and see when the cars are gone, which is always lovely, and see how people engage with each other. It's completely opposite. So they don't just come to buy, they come to talk about their community. So I'm an optimist in terms of this great movement that Helena is leading, because I think you've only got to get people to engage with it, and they get it immediately without you having to thrust it down their throats.
Thank you, George. There's a question I have for you before we move on to John. Helena spoke in the film about this being a bottom-up movement and that it's a people-led movement, and I thoroughly support and agree with that. How though do we tackle on a local level? You've worked within, obviously, as the first elected mayor, you've seen firsthand how bureaucracy can stand in the way. If people want to start their own markets, perhaps there's red tape and things that get in the way. How do people actually overcome some of the red tape or bureaucracy that could be stifling the growth of this movement?
Well, I think Bristol, and probably every city that's a good city, is a good city because of the individuals that take initiatives rather than the governance. And I used to say when I was mayor that, you know, in a way, we're a good city in spite of our governance. We're a good city because people take local initiatives. And one of the things I did was liberalize markets, because the city was very controlling about markets. And I think if you just say yes to people who have got local initiatives, instead of being too cautious about it, and that message gets out, you know, whether they're local play schemes or whatever they might be, then you get an explosion of things happening. If you say yes to people who want to start a swimming club in the harbour, even though the water may not be 100% safe, instead of saying, you know, being too cautious, which is what governance tends to do, you are giving people permission to do things. You're giving people permission maybe to do something that is traditionally been thought of as slightly dangerous. Give permission to people to occupy the streets with walking and cycling and scooters, and doing the things that may annoy some car drivers and who are also electors, but which is why politics sometimes gets in the way of these things happening. So I think that good leadership is very much about giving permission for local initiatives. And once people get that message, there will be an absolute explosion of stuff happening, and people will enjoy it, and they will see that it improves their physical health, their mental health, and eventually their pockets.
Thank you, George. John, I'd like to come to you now. John is the founder of Matter Whole Foods, on the bleeding edge of localization, you know, at the front-facing element of the localization movement through the work that you do. Very interested, obviously, also to hear your reflections on what's been discussed so far, but your view as well on how supporting local food systems can make organic whole food accessible to everyone, contribute to the local economy, the health and happiness of its members. Very interested to hear your views from your unique perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I came into this whole organic whole foods just out of the fact that in my area, which is quite an alternative area, there wasn't really anything on offer. Your average corner shop and stuff like that offering, you know, what I would consider to be not particularly nutritious foods. And after asking around in the local shops if they were prepared to start selling it, I was met with no's, and so I started to use my space that I have here in Easton as a shop, and it grew just from a few boxes on the floor up into the big shop that it is now, and was supplying the whole community with everything that they need to nourish themselves. And as part of that journey, I've discovered that yeah, it's been along the lines of what we're discussing today. I've made a lot of discoveries regarding how important local supply is and the benefits that it does bring. For me, I'd say that a lot of the benefits, obviously, keeping the money in the local community. So by supporting local, you're able to generate more jobs. You're able to have food that is less traveled. A big focus for us is the organic side of things as well, which for us means that less pollutants going into the environment. So it's all very key to what we do. But over the years, it's definitely developed what we've been up to here, because we've sort of found these other reasons that are beneficial for this type of shopping. We've got obviously the sustainable elements of what we do, which is benefiting not just the people that shop here, because obviously that's good for their health, but of course it's beneficial to everybody, locally and globally, because we're putting less, we're harming the environment less by doing it this way. What I have noticed over the years is obviously getting people. There are a lot of people who are really, who wouldn't be into the idea of having a healthy environment and a healthy body. Two things which, without those things, you know, life isn't really happening. But people are sort of automatically, even though they've got this desire to do it, they're automatically put at a disadvantage because the cost is more. It's always sort of bewildered me that the fact that, you know, to sort of have a UK apple is more expensive than a New Zealand apple. You know, it's sort of frustrating me to sort of have to battle this whole sort of getting people to be able to prioritize and afford to do things that are right for themselves and right for the environment, when you've got sort of this globalization, which is, I mean, for me, I feel that it's probably the subsidies which are making it cheaper. And like I say, it's putting people on the back foot when it comes to actually doing what's right for them and doing what's right for the environment. So yeah, we sort of constantly in this quandary of you know, we're it's not even the mainstream that are going to be interested in particular. It's more of a sort of an alternative community at this stage. But like George, you know, and myself, you know, we're doing it because it's what's right, not what's profitable. You know, it really feels like this is the right way to go. And regardless of you know, all of the things that are in our way, we sort of still push forward and want to see this movement happen.
Yeah, I mean, George obviously expressed his passion for this piece, as you have done yourself, around the amount of food that is exported and then imported, the same food type imported, just so that the corporations can capture that margin to profit from that difference, when, you know, sufficient goods are being produced within the local economies that could cater to the needs of the local economies. What have some of the barriers been for you in terms of sourcing local goods? Is that been a challenge for you, or have you been able to find an abundance of suppliers?
Well, obviously, you've got a couple of main things. I mean, one is obviously that the cost of locally produced food is more expensive, but also people are sort of struggling to you know, bring all of that all year round. So there are going to be the hungry gaps. And, you know, Matter Whole Foods has been doing well. We're growing, going from strength to strength. And we want to put back into the environment and back into the community. And going forward, we'd like to do things which would be, you know, sort of helping a sort of all year round UK sustainability through agriculture, through urban agriculture, through fermenting, canning, so enabling ourselves to sort of have food all year round. Then during the hungry gap, I envisage things like microgreens and mushrooms being grown to sort of subsidize the lack of fresh vegetables that would be available for the hungry gap.
That's a really interesting perspective, and actually I'd like to come to Helen to talk about this, because to me, I think Charles would have commented on it as well. You know, our preferences for the food we eat and our dietary choices, to what extent those choices are informed by the advertising of the major corporations that are promoting this certain way of living. Your solutions, you know, require us to think differently about what we eat, but actually very positively, because not only does it enable us to eat seasonal goods, it enables us to look at more of a diversified diet, which actually, for our health standpoint, is very powerful. Helen, would you like to comment on some of those elements that John has brought forth?
Okay, I'd love to. I just want us to really keep driving home the message that the costs are a political choice. And as you were saying, John, it's to do with the subsidies, but it's to do with the subsidies, the taxes, and the regulations. And Charles, you were talking about, oh, sorry, George, you were talking about deregulating the markets. And that's so interesting because, of course, the neoliberal globalists have been deregulating the market, the global market, while those corporations that have been pushing for global deregulation have been pressuring governments to regulate at the local and national level. And we know many specific examples, but it's been this insidious process where regulations are a key reason why local, fresh, healthy food is more expensive than processed, toxic food from the other side of the world, which comes out of monocultural farms that are less productive, and they become less and less and less productive because they kill off the soil. So it's a complete joke. It's utterly outrageous that this is going on. And I would argue again that the reason it's happening is because of the lack of the big picture. And the resistance for many people to look at the economy. I've spoken to brilliant physicists, to a brilliant professor who had a chair at the University of Chinese, Professor Tian, professor at the University of Beijing and at the University of Berkeley, California. And he agreed with my analysis, but he said, I'm not an economist. I can't speak out about this. I agree with what you're saying, but I can't speak about it because I'm not an economist. We're trapped in this belief that only the specialists can speak. And, you know, you have to be an Einstein or, you know, Einstein to be able to reflect on the bigger picture. And you certainly can't be a woman like me and be taken seriously. But it is really what we all have to do now. We really have to just step back, see and understand the basic principles and structures and speak out, and then support the bigger picture that's being created. As we put these materials together, I just please help us get out this message that the over-regulation at the local level is disastrous. And the courage of someone like George to say, well, I'm going to take a bit of a risk, you know, maybe that water isn't entirely safe. Maybe people can make a mistake. But if you put the picture together with the fact that our governments, while telling you that people shouldn't be allowed to be swimming in their river, they are giving corporations the right to play around with our genes with the potential impact for millions of years. So this absolute, you know, incredible dissonance between the deregulation at the global level, where these giant corporations can play with life on Earth, can choose to subsidize the satellites and the path that allows Elon Musk to make even more billions at great risk to humanity at every level. And then at the same time, at the local level, no, you have to wear gloves. I don't know if that's still happening in fields in Australia, but they were told they had to wear gloves to pick beans. And they're supposed to have water available to wash their hands in the fields. I mean, it's just like totally insane what's happening. But because we're not stepping back and looking at this deregulation and the subsidies at the global level, subsidizing players that don't pay tax while squeezing everyone else for taxes, including you and me as individuals, but also businesses. And then the regulations, which are now ever more bureaucratic, ever more insane, strangling creative, genuine entrepreneurship, genuine, if you like, capitalism. Perhaps we should be embracing the term capitalism. Perhaps it's fine if some people want to be more creative and entrepreneurial, earn a little bit more than others, because maybe other people don't particularly, want to spend time earning money. As long as this is within the parameters of genuine democracy, genuinely accountable, visible structures, this is what this analysis is saying that's very different from the conventional critique of capitalism, from the sort of general historical critique of this global capitalist system. Anyway, I could say a lot more. But.
Thank you. And I mean, it raises a number of extra questions that I'll come back to. What's interesting, I mean, within our content, we've pointed out this notion that you've shared around one rule for one set of players and another rule for others. This has played out in many different contexts. In the last couple of years, we've talked about the notion of government overreach and government underreach. And usually the government overreach usually affects civilians and local communities, and the underreach benefits the large and existing elite. And this it doesn't matter what sector you look at, this is playing out. And this for me is where there is an opportunity, because we're operating in silos on different issues, speaking about the same problem, but falling out over the specifics, including views on capitalism. So I think it's interesting to have that nuance, because it enables a broader set of people to enter into a conversation. George, the term political choice was used. This is the second time I've heard the term political choice. The first was last week in the context of the current energy bill crisis. And again, the same story is that this is being enabled through political choice. What are some of our political options, do you think, where we face some of these challenges, where these decisions are being made by central organizations that are so far removed from the local communities? What's necessary to have this macro influence to build upon what Helena has shared?
Well, I mean, Helena is absolutely dead right in that we are subsidizing and liberalizing the wrong things while being much more restrictive about the good local thing. And so somebody's asked an interesting question. And there are some good questions there, Dan, to have a look at. And somebody's asked a question: would you ban imports? No, I think it would be difficult to ban imports of food. But what we should be doing, and this is a political choice, is we should stop subsidizing fuel that is not just subsidizing the food that's coming abroad, but subsidizing the travel for that food that's coming from abroad. And then we can operate on a level playing field where the local can truly compete in a fair way with the international food trade that is exploitative of local communities. So I think there are loads of political choices, a lot around energy, that is, that maybe is an opportunity now for people to, it's a cruel thing, but for people to respect the cost of energy, the real cost of energy, instead of using it in a wasteful manner by flying potatoes from Russia to, well, wherever it is, from China to the UK. So I think there are lots of political choices that don't have to be punitive, They're just leveling the playing field between the global and the local. And then the local becomes the obvious choice.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yes. And the thing is, when you actually look at it honestly and the bigger picture, I am convinced that the vast majority of people would go along with that common sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, as for me, the problem is the siloed thinking, it's the over-specialization that's been encouraged increasingly in these last 35 years in this new era of globalization. And yeah, that's the problem. And as I tried to say in the film, also in some ways, once we understand that the main problem we're up against is the perspective, is the narrow view. And what we need to disseminate is the picture where we put two and two together. I think, you know, the potential for change is much greater than we think. However, we've got to be aware that in the dominant areas of media and academia, virtually every avenue of knowledge, it's hard to get a voice in that isn't well funded. In other words, it's big money that's funding the ideas. So that's why we have to be more creative. You know, or any of the listeners, the activist movements, we have to be more creative in getting this holistic picture out.
Well, on that point, I've got the questions here from the audience, and I'd like to pose this one to John from Dan Haylock. He asked that our digital convenience culture creates a disassociation with manual work and real conversation. How do we persuade people that the work involved in localization and genuine relationships is fun, fulfilling and rewarding? Is this a generational challenge? Obviously, you've been someone who's taken the initiative, done the hard graft. You've set up an organization that supports localization. How do we encourage more people to do what you've done?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, in my mind, there's a lot of ways that we could sort of incorporate the sort of lifestyle that we've got now to sort of to work together with, you know, the sort of practices that we're practicing. I mean, at the moment, people are, you know, driving across town after a busy day at work, and you know, they've got to get to the gym, and they're sort of frustrated by all of the traffic, and they're revving their engine, and they get to the gym, and then they get on an electric machine, and they, you know, they're in an air conditioned place, and they're being starved of nature because they haven't really got time to do that, because they're too busy sort of, you know, doing all of the things to sort of counteract the fact that the current society that we live in. And I think, you know, we could actually sort of provide more. I've got ideas where you could provide more, say in the local parks or something like that, where you're doing agriculture as a sort of sport. You know, you could throw over some of the space that's used for football or whatever, and you could be creating sort of farming techniques and you know, different things that people could you know, re-engage with natural practices. I'm really into foraging myself. There's it's an abundance of food that could be harvested and preserved, and all of these things. People are hungry for that type of information as well. So, you know, I think that there's definitely a way of integrating the sort of the need for fitness and knowledge and stuff like that with this sort of older, you know, the survival instincts and the sort of being able to provide sustainably for ourselves.
Thank you. Helen, I come to you now. There's been a question around self-sufficiency and moving towards self-sufficiency. The idea that the UK, for instance, has not been self-sufficient for many decades. Is the possibility of self-sufficiency within our reach? And if so, what would need to happen to accelerate the path towards a sovereign self-sufficiency?
Well, it's again changing the key mechanisms in assisting that government starts deregulating and subsidizing this path towards greater diversification, greater self-reliance. And within a very short period, we would see amazing response with a little bit of help from the top. I am so inspired by the number of initiatives that are sprouting up across the world without any help from government, without any help from above, really, no help from mainstream media. It's all and just embodied intuitive reaction to what people see that is needed, and what they see makes sense. What they see gives them joy, makes them healthier, makes them happier. But I really recommend very strongly the film, The Biggest Little Farm. If you haven't seen it, please do. The Biggest Little Farm is a beautiful expression, shows over about a 7-year period what happens when you take a bit of dead land and focus on diversification, including animals in the cycle, vegetables, trees. It's remarkable how you can bring back not only health to the soil, you can bring back, basically create a situation where you have water and water retention in what was dead, parched soil. So we have to understand that this path of specialization, monoculture for export, that's the deadly heart of this global, very destructive economic system. From the outset, it was imposed by global traders. It made global traders richer, but it was impoverishing societies and ecosystems from the outset. The logic in the economic system of comparative advantage, which is the principle that says it doesn't make sense for you to keep producing everything you need. You should specialize in what you're good at. That sounds so common sense and so logical. You can understand why people say, yeah, sure. We can grow oats very well in Scotland, but we can't grow corn, we can't grow grapes. Yeah, let's specialize in export. But like I say, no one has been briefed with stepping back to look at what happens when that is taken to this extreme, which I have to say also at the outset was actually, this whole concept was pushed by the global elites that were benefiting from imposing this type of specialization at the local level. So if we just do what we can in our local communities, come together to work together from the seed to the plate, and as George says back again, if we work together to create those food systems, we will not only see how beneficial they are, but if we can also communicate to others about the existing projects that already exist, that are demonstrating how beneficial this path is. Yeah, I just want to stress that there's too little effort put into funding the communication of these success stories. Too much focus is put on how can I create a new project? We need that, but I think we need many more people to actually fund and support the dissemination of this vision, accompanied by examples, as we try to do in this film. So I think if we do that all the time, pressuring upwards, starting with local and regional government, but being clear that we've got to reach governments at the national level with this global systemic understanding and the local examples, that's how we can start to make really meaningful change.
Thank you. I suppose the good news from our organization's point of view, the Elevate Network is built for exactly what you've just described, not only dissemination of information to help people become aware of the various issues that the world is facing, but actually to connect with other people who are doing the work, inspiring projects, how we can synthesize best practice, share ideas, share the learnings, but also become aware of what's going on, because I live in Bristol and there's so much happening in this city that even keeping track of what's happening here is one thing. And I'm sure that George and John you could share many examples of great projects happening here now. So I think this is where technology becomes a tool for change as opposed to something that is part of the problem. And we can actually utilize that to actually create networks around what's happening in the world. This notion of the political part of the solution is coming up frequently within the comments. George, I'll come to you on this one. Interestingly, we had a submission of a question before the panel. They couldn't make it today, but asking whether we should be attempting to seek to put forward representatives within local governments, local councils who are in favor of localization, who can become advocates within politics. Do you see that as a route forward to advance the political challenge?
I think that's happening to a certain extent. And I mean, Bristol has moved from being dominated by the two main parties now to having equality between, for instance, Labour, the ruling party, in terms of numbers of representatives, and the Greens, who really are the local party to a certain extent. That's what they, in most cases, the Greens are preaching this localism message. So while I'm not a member of the Green Party, I'm independent. I think that there is actually a real movement towards place first and politics second, which is probably the way forward. Your community, your place should come before any political advocacy. Somebody has asked the question, how do we get rid of capitalism? I don't think it's a matter of, the danger with that sort of approach is that you're then going to divide good people on both sides of the economic argument away from the important answer. Localism, I think, can embrace different beliefs like that. What we need to do is get rid of the domination of global capitalism. It's not about getting rid of, I think communityism can embrace both a local capitalism and a local communism, if you like. Go to Havana, where everybody grows their own food. It used to be they mended their own pavements and things. I don't know what's happening there at the moment, but that created, out of whatever you believed in that particular political movement, created very, very strong communities. So let's not complicate the argument of localism with other, with for and against other political beliefs, because I actually believe that localism will bring together people into a common cause that will make life and health a good deal better than it currently is.
I'd like to explore that further with you, Helena, because I think this to me has been one of the biggest barriers to progress with the kind of localization movement as a whole. The concepts of capitalism, you mentioned communism, these are very divisive words to different people. And the moment people associate a movement with either anti-capitalism or pro-communism, for instance, that's shut the door to a lot of people. The moment a movement becomes associated with the political left or the political right, that shuts the door to a whole lot of people. I think we've become subjected to these polarizations and divisions that have actually prevented us from working together. And as I've mentioned before, even in the last couple of years, there have been people who have been campaigning. I've been to different protests formed by different groups campaigning on different issues, but they're all, if you just recorded the speeches and took out the kind of top line policies they're campaigning on, they're speaking about the exact same things, yet they're actually fighting each other. And to me, this is part of the big problem. The big problem itself is the way that we're divided and polarized, and finding a way to transcend that, I think, is our greatest opportunity, but it's also probably our greatest challenge. So I think, Helena, when I watched the film Planet Local, I think to me that was one of the first documentaries style films that I've watched where I didn't feel triggered once during the course of the program, which in many cases I've experienced within the kind of overall pursuit of social change, that I usually find a point where there is a political divide. Whereas last night when we premiered that film, I think others would agree that it was presented in a way that enables people from all backgrounds, all political leanings to actually embrace. So I'd like to pose that to you, Helena, because I think it's a big problem. Polarization, division amongst people. How do you see a way forward with these challenges?
But actually, I would say our film, The Economics of Happiness, perhaps does an even better job, because in Planet Local, I was slightly worried that we came out looking a bit too green, because again, once we really understand what can happen when people come together at the local level, then these labels of green or capitalist or communist, these labels fall away. And there is a natural way that people in a local community could never use GDP as a measure. It just wouldn't be possible for them to all subscribe to the idea that we'll cut down every tree on the mountain and we're going to call it progress. It wouldn't be possible. So what happens when people come together in their local communities, and the land and the water and the trees are part of the environment that supports them. And when they actually have agency over what happens to that water and the soil, they become naturally green. But in the dominant system, there are now so many people who are struggling so hard just to put food on the table. And they have become convinced that the Greens care more about a rare frog or a rare bird than they care about them, because they're being 24/7 brainwashed by the idea that progress, building that new road, building that new nuclear power plant, building this great new super highway, or that new, bringing in the new Walmart, is all part of progress. It's providing jobs, it's good for, so they're being manipulated into believing that green threatens them. And so this is again why localism as a conceptual framing, but also as a practical rebuilding of the community fabric and people coming together at the local level to think about their future, is such a win-win-win strategy. What also happens at the local level, if the shopkeeper happens to be Hindu, or happens to be a white male, or happens to be gay, what's important is whether they're running a shop that actually provides you with your needs. And this is Dan, or this is Mary, or this is Mohammed. These are people who I get to know and I relate to. And suddenly all those labels, whether they're foreign, whether they're different, whether they fall away. What happens is, what becomes important is, are they human beings who have respect for others and who are doing a good job? It's very, very scary to me that we are not aware of the extent to which we are becoming entirely run by labels rather than direct experience. And I just want to give another example. In some eco villages, some intentional communities, they discovered that if there's some conflict in the community, sometimes there'll be a few hundred families living in a community, and they discovered when they have conflict that they are now saying, we're not going to use email. We're going to meet face to face. They've discovered that this tool is actually distancing. It forces us to relate only through the words. We don't have the human contact. We don't see and feel the bodily movements. We don't look people in their eye in the same way. So I just want to say that at a much deeper level, the direct experiential face-to-face contact is essential for healthy human relationships. It's essential for healthy farming. The idea that robots linked to satellites are now going to do the farming for us is this enormous step in a direction of treating the earth as a mechanical factory. It's never going to work. It cannot work. It can never give that respect to that unique strawberry plant of yours that's right next to another strawberry plant, and one is twice as big as the other, and you are there working with the fruit that ripens earlier, the fruit that ripens later. Once you impose the mechanical standard machine on life, you are wasting and you are destroying an opportunity to work creatively and joyfully with life, with the infinite diversity of life, every single plant, every single human being. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using this technology that we're using now to try to communicate a message that is about how can we get back to life? How can we get back to face-to-face relationships, to rebuilding that fabric of connection that Charles also talks about and that we try to talk about.
Yeah, John, I'd like to ask you about that in terms of the work that you've done. We've talked about the kind of economics, the politics, and the practicalities of the food supply. But in terms of the work that you've done on a local level, how has it contributed to the kind of local community in terms of forming connections, creating that direct person-to-person network? Tell us a little bit about the positives that have resulted from the work that you've done.
Perfect question there. Yeah, we really feel like in the shop we're getting so much community get-togethers. People are interacting very much in the shop, and it is a strong thing that we notice. We always call ourselves so much more than a shop because people do exactly that. They get together, they're chatting, there might be someone at the counter and they're saying, oh, I'm getting some turmeric because it's anti-inflammatory and I do this with it. And then someone else behind in the queue will say, oh, really? Oh, tell me more. And then a discussion will ensue regarding health benefits of particular things. And we're learning and we're researching and we're passing on things. And, the sort of local people are bringing in their produce to sell and their products that they've made. And the amount of times I've found myself in the shop and you've just got these amazing people around, sort of chocolatiers and great giants that, you eat their products and just feel very blessed to be creating a hub which actually sort of enables these people to come together and share and be a community. There's obviously this sort of whole online shopping or supermarket shopping, as I think George touched on earlier. People aren't really communicating in those types of places. I certainly remember back in the day when I would use supermarkets and you're just in a rush to get in and out, and you might see someone and you just try and pretend you haven't seen them. And whereas in our shop, we get people staying for hours, literally hours, and chatting and sharing, and there's a wonderful sense of community that comes from what we're doing here, and people are feeling nourished both through what's in their basket, but also through what's the conversations and the sort of inspiration and the hope that is being generated by what it is we've found ourselves doing.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story.
I just want to say I feel so lucky that because of my work all these years trying to encourage particularly the local food things, but this coming together in community, every day I get to hear about these amazing, inspiring examples. They are happening. It's like George was saying, he's feeling optimistic. I do, however, want to warn about the way that the other systemic escalation could still cause a lot of damage. So I think the next few years are crucial in giving voice to this inspiring movement. Again, what I think local is one of the best terms to cover the systemic dimension, but it's not enough. Local is being co-opted as well. HSBC, the world's local bank. Mm-hmm. So again, we need several terms, smaller scale, more diversified, slower. These are key elements of the path forward, life affirming, reconnecting. And yeah, this holistic picture, we need to get it out.
Thank you. George, any reflections on what we've been discussing and comments on some of the questions that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, just maybe we've got an unhealthy level of agreement. And there's nothing that I would disagree with that John, Charles, or Helena has said. I think Charles was talking about technology. I think that's something that none of the rest of us have really addressed. I think there is a very great danger in seeing technology as an answer, but it's how we use it. We're using it now in a way that links people with different issues. I think technology used for messaging about this is absolutely vital in a way that we just couldn't do. Otherwise, you couldn't do it by pigeon post. But technology is the answer to the environmental and climate challenges that we've got are dangerous. When you go to the big extremes like nuclear power by its nature is a global solution. It's a big solution that requires a massive network. Local technologies that particularly solar, wind, and the renewables can be captured by local communities to the benefit of local communities. I mean, a wonderful example we've got in Bristol is where a quite challenged, impoverished local community has worked with local energy cooperatives and the local energy expertise that we have in this city to commission a major wind turbine that totally benefits their community. That is in total contrast to the new Hinkley power station that nobody relates to themselves and nobody sees the benefit of it to themselves or their community. So I think technology that's captured by communities for communities can be really good. Technology that is just simply creating bigger global corporations that that are taking over the world are very dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's down to our relation. Communities to me are about relationships, and when you get into the abstract, our relationship with technology is one that can be healthy or it can be harmful.
Yeah, we don't all have to be hippies to be local. I think it's really, and I'm a bit hippie in some ways, and I don't use that as an insult. I just think, we can embrace all. I come back to, I think we can embrace all beliefs in local. And I think that's really important. And we embrace the technologies that work for us, but dismiss those that are by their nature big and require big corporations to operate and, unfortunately, to control us.
And I have to say there, the biggest question is around the internet, because the internet definitely serves the global commercial entities in a way that it doesn't the genuinely local. It's very tricky. So I would urge people to try to look at using the internet as we have it now and these tools of communication to get at the message about localism, but to be very cautious about encouraging 5G and an escalation, that more of our taxes should be used to increase the speed, to increase the scale of our dependence on these technological systems. And I think a very important area here to discuss is the extent to which blockchain and the internet would genuinely serve decentralization and localization. I think we need to be extremely skeptical, and I'd love to talk to people who genuinely understand exactly how blockchain works and what it really means in terms of a true independence of local communities. I'm seeing that in the local food world, for instance, so often people now want to set up an app and use the internet for the relationship between the consumer and the farmer. And in all my experience, all these years, those systems have never worked as well as the face-to-face ones, as the farmers markets, the shops, the farm shop, community support agriculture, subscription agriculture, have all been more effective and have got off the ground and lasted much longer. And of course, when we look at it, there are many reasons why. It's what you were saying, John, that people are feeling nourished, not just by the food, but by those local relationships. And when they stand in that queue and they learn from someone else about the benefits of turmeric, that this is, again, these are multifarious ways that are solution multipliers, because this is why localization is so important. It's a systemic win, 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 win. And actually, the winning has even more dimensions than we can even begin to talk about here. When we get into the spiritual side of things, that would be another whole program. So maybe we can pursue that another day.
Yes, well, the good thing is, what the work that we're doing at Elevate Network is hosting these panel discussions, and we're developing a faculty actually where we're bringing people together from very different domain expertise. So the likes of a conversation around decentralization, around blockchain, for instance, bringing people together who are working in different sectors. This is our opportunity to actually facilitate those conversations. And George mentioned that there's been a lot of commonalities and agreement amongst the panel. And I think what we're trying to foster is, in the culture of kind of this, the background of cultural safetyism, we're trying to create courageous spaces where we can have difficult conversations, but in a very respectful manner. Because we've touched upon polarization and division. The reality is we've had a very pleasant conversation here today, and there's people in the comments who've been asking some interesting questions. If we open up the debate, for instance, around even just the subject of capitalism, my view is it wouldn't take very long for that to escalate into a very heated and spirited debate. But what we need to be able to do is have those conversations and actually get to some of the things that we share in common, and actually find. My experience is actually we are actually looking for the same thing, but we're disagreeing on the means of attaining it. We hosted a day looking at different forms of solutions, and there's a couple of examples I could give. And one example is of a table looking at the future of finance, and there was this heated discussion around the preservation of cash versus embracing cryptocurrency, barter, all of these different discussions. But when we actually drew it back to what are you actually debating? What are you actually looking for? And it turned out that everyone was looking for sovereignty over their cash. They didn't want to have they wanted to restore privacy, but they also wanted to have convenience and autonomy over how they spend their money. Cash, crypto, barter gave all three the opportunity to achieve that. So we often find ourselves arguing about the same thing, but we're actually debating the means of attaining it and disagreeing on the means of attaining it. I think when we can have a higher level conversation, the big picture activism that you talk about, Helena, looking at the systems level, having that complexity of thinking, we can actually get out of the weeds and into the bigger picture to start to understand what the systemic complex issues are. And then to me, the beauty is there is a multitude. The diversity of solutions is fascinating. And that by embracing a diversity of solutions, it enables people to find things that they resonate with. And ultimately, if it's moving the needle forward in a positive way, to me, that is part of the solution in itself, is recognizing there are different means of achieving something. This has been a truly fascinating, revealing conversation. As I said, we're going to be doing a lot more of these. We're having a number of different conversations like this across a different series of dimensions. We're holding these to address big picture issues in the world. We're doing this particular conversation today in alignment with World Localization Day, which has been the center of our conversation today. If you haven't yet figured out what's going on with World Localization Day, we encourage you to go to worldlocalizationday.com. You can see all of the events. We've done two here with Elevate, but there's a whole multitude happening across the month that Helena and the team are helping to co-facilitate. This is such an important topic, and certainly from our community off the back of the pandemic, people are looking for solutions. They're looking for initiatives that they can get involved with on a localized basis. Now, the good news is there is obviously a lot of groundswell of activity. The big question is how we signpost that activity. Off the back of the film last night, Helena, there was lots of questions. People saying, I'm based in this part of the UK, I'm based in London. What's going on in my area? How do we find it? What are some of the answers to that? What are some of the easiest ways, in your view, for people to connect with the localization movement and find out what's going on in the area, in their areas?
I would say, first of all, it has to do with this shift in lenses, so that they're actually starting consciously to look for these small and relatively invisible initiatives in a more conscious way. In other words, they need to be awakened to the fact that most of the good news in the world is happening from the bottom up at a human scale, and it's being made invisible. If we had an honest press, we would be having, we would be informed, we'd know that the way to feed the world is by going smaller and more diversified and supporting genuine food sovereignty, food security. Right now we're hearing, alarm bells and how we're going to feed the world, and we're going to do it now through, we're being pressured to believe that we need to shift into even more technology to feed the world. If we were allowed to get the truth out, we would be knowing about these projects. But what we have to do now is to do a bit of research, where you start with one, possibly look at anything to do with permaculture, to do with local food initiatives, and find your way that way. One way that people have often started the sort of conversation in their city or in their area has been by using one of our films to do a film showing, and then they find that the people who show up for that film represent a whole community, very diverse community from many different backgrounds, who are beginning to share that common sense knowledge that we need to come together to build a community fabric, to reconnect as a way in quite a few, in many parts of the world, where by putting on a conference where we brought out people like George and Charles and others that you've probably heard of, many are in the film, and together with local activists, we presented a panel, a chorus of voices that helped people to not only come together and to see what's happening locally, but to generate more activity. These films that we produce can also act as a conference in a way. You can put on a community screening or a screening in your town, and then bring in some of the local activists, those who are leading projects there. And I want to say, actually, the website is worldlocalizationday.org. And I want to encourage you to go to localfutures.org. We are a very, very full website, because what we represent is a sort of treasure trove for anyone who's interested in localization, because we've been putting together readings and materials for 40 years. So we've had articles and writings, we have examples, we have a whole series actually called Planet Local. We have a Planet Local series on our website of examples from around the world. We could only cover very few in the film. So you will find there a treasure trove of ideas and materials and inspiration, including a localization action guide, which gives you examples of initiatives that you might want to undertake and where you can learn from initiatives around the world. So thank you very much, Dan, for putting this on, and I look forward to collaborating more in the future.
Thank you. And for our UK visitors, the World Localization Day is spelt with a Z, so make sure you get it, worldlocalizationday.org, localfutures.org. Thank you, Helena, for everything that you're doing. George, before we wrap up, is there any projects that you would like to signpost, or any resources that you would like to share in closing?
I don't know about a specific project, but I think that, I come back to where I started, really, that I think all those little food projects are making a huge difference. And we need to recognize that farms don't have to be 10 acres, which is the official size that a farm has to be recognized as a farm by government in the UK, to be productive and worthwhile. As Helena mentioned, in a way, the smaller the better. And you get higher productivity and you get more local interest. And so I think what is going to be the big thing is the development of networks of little local initiatives that come together to produce something so much bigger than the mega business.
Thank you. And John, you're obviously based in Bristol here, where I'm also based. Could you share a little bit about how people can find your shop and how to reach you online?
Yeah, well, our website is matterwholefoods.uk. We're here in Easton, in Bristol, and yeah, you can come in the shop. We've got all of our whole foods and fruit and veg. We try to keep everything as accessible as possible, so we keep the prices down by utilizing what might otherwise become waste in our kitchen. So we're doing a lot of sauerkrauts and juices and meals, and it's a great thing because those are cheap, and so is the stock on the shelves. So it's great for obviously people see the stuff on the shelf. That's the first thing with accessibility, but the second is obviously that you can afford to buy it. So we do a lot. We work very hard to make this happen. I'd just like to say as well, I think, you know, as a small sort of independent business that is doing beneficial things for the community and for the environment, I find myself, you know, like George has, I believe George has a shop as well, and I support it. I'm in collaboration with anybody doing a similar thing to me. Whereas obviously, if you look at the sort of globalized, you know, the companies which are doing damage to the environment in the name of profits, which I think should be outlawed, you know, they're in competition, and I don't consider myself to be in competition with anybody who's doing the same thing as what we're doing. We're all out to do the same thing. We want to bring nourishing food in a clean, sustainable way to the community, and we want to grow that. And I think that there should be support coming from subsidies, from all wherever government, and we should all be collaborating to make this happen. And I think our long-term goal is really to sort of make it accessible for all, and to sort of overcome the barrier of not being able to afford it. People who can't afford it should be able to be supported in the short term, and in the long term, yeah, lobbying for change of subsidies. I believe that, you know, if you took 1% of the subsidies which are currently going to banks, to war, to oil, to dairy, to all of the things which are not for everybody, if you took 1% of 1% of that and put it into a sustainable food, then we'd probably, I mean, I hazard a guess that we'd probably eat for free almost, but certainly we could make it as affordable as it is currently in the conventional food, so people wouldn't feel the need to turn to you know, budget shopping at the cost of the environment, at the cost of human resource, and maybe even slavery. So we sort of, yeah, definitely like to get involved in sort of creating that sort of movement. And I don't know if you've got something going forward, but it would be interesting to maybe set up some sort of localization convention, you know, so in each city or whatever, rather than having one that everybody flies into from around the world, we could potentially start conventions where we get together and we discuss local ideas and share as a community. Maybe George wants to do that on his 5-acre farm, who knows?
Again, rather than flying people in, we found that sending the film in you can have voices from around the world coming in through a film, and then you have local people coming together. It's a model that works really well. So I hope, because it is very important, because we're being blackmailed all the time into believing that if we localize in Bristol, we're being these selfish elite Westerners who don't care about poverty in Africa. There's huge propaganda, you know, think tanks that undermine what we're doing. It's painted as right wing. It's painted as this sort of selfish, middle class, elitist thing. So again, getting the global voices coming in through film is a very good way to go. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so we've had, in closing, we've had Helena with us today, Helena Noble-Hodge from Planet Local, the film, also Local Futures, World Localization Day. We've had Charles Eisenstein with us earlier on today, George Ferguson and John from matter Whole Foods. It's been a fascinating conversation. We're here with Elevate Network. We're building regional groups across the UK, taking action across a number of different issues, working on a number of different projects. So we also invite you to join us within the Elevate Network. We can find at weareelevate.org. My name is Dan Astin-Gregory. Thank you very much to our panelists, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks again. Good night, good day, good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. It's been a pleasure here hosting this special event in celebration of World Localization Day. Thank you all.